David Orr is the rare person who has not only talked the talk and walked the walk, he has built the building. And what that means, you will be told this evening at 8 o'clock by Neva Hassanen, when she will give you a full account of David's accomplishments, and when he will talk about down to the wire, confronting climate collapse. David's topic this afternoon is building post-carbon cities, the Oberlin Project. Please join me in welcoming David Orr.
My secretary called this morning, and apparently there's a talk here on campus today that preceded mine. Is why women have sex, or why women want sex. Is that true? Is this, I mean, the talk title, is this true? So the rumor had gone around the Oberlin campus that I was giving that talk. And if you're here for that talk, that's in another room. Albert, it's great to see you. One of my heroes in modern thought, in philosophy in particular, is Albert Borgman. And so, Albert, it's great to see you again, and thanks for all your wonderful work. This is a talk about my day job, and actually this talk should be follow the evening talk. Tonight I'm going to talk about climate change. This is kind of the upshot of that talk, but they're in inverse order, and that's just the way things worked out. So this is about my day job, and I want to start with a couple of reflections on where are we and what is this thing called life. Can all of you see the screen okay? Do we need to dim any of the lights? Is that all right? There is this, all of you know, we're on planet Earth. If you don't know that, find out quick. If you took all the life from as far down in the ocean depths to as far out in the atmosphere, it would be a film of maybe 8 miles, 10 miles, but something in that range. We're a planet now with 7 billion of us, and in the year 1800 there were 1 billion people on the planet. We'll probably peak by 2050 to maybe 9.2 billion people is the UN median estimate. Historically, we're at the end of an era of cheap fossil fuels. We're not going to run out of fossil fuels, but they will not. We're through the era in which they are cheap, and so whatever that means for us, and it will mean a great deal. In terms of atmosphere and climate, and this is tonight's talk, we're at 390 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, and we're climbing inexorably toward 450 or whatever. And that has its own meanings. We've never been there before. Civilization is maybe, however you time these things, 5,000 years, maybe 10,000 years, whatever, but we have not been on the planet very long. We've lived in this era of abnormally stable climate, and that is the paradise we call the Holocene. It's the only paradise humans have ever known, and we're evicting ourselves from that particular paradise. The fabric on life is fraying. We are now in the process of losing 25 to maybe 50% of the species on Earth, but who could know? All we know is it's a very large number. Some of the species we will lose them before we even know that they exist, before they're cataloged. Now, where are we in terms of public events and public consciousness? Well, we're running a couple of different deficits. The dominant story in the papers and in certainly the financial press is the economic collapse that is now well into its second year, the banking collapse, and we'll figure that out. Sooner or later, we'll figure that out more or less. In the meantime, we're running a second deficit, and this, of course, is the carbon deficit. And you can state this in lots of different ways, but we're running a deficit of about 7 billion tons of carbon entering the atmosphere every year. It's the rate of increase dropped a little bit last year, as your Missoula and Montana reported today, but it's not all that significant. Here are some kind of random other thoughts. The world in which we live is nonlinear, and all that means is, as all of you know, that 2 plus 2 is not always 4. Sometimes there are straws that break the camel's back. There are tipping points where just one more increment of change and you have a whole different system. Systems people call this step level changes, but the world in which you live is not a world that is gradual always and so forth. It's sometimes a world in which just radically changes. And we know that's true with climate change. In a period of 10 years, we have a paleo record that shows that in fact 10 years time in climate can flip climates dramatically. And then there is this issue of leads and lags. And if I could make 2 changes in American education, it would be that nobody gets out of 12 years of public schooling and certainly 4 years of higher education without understanding systems and things that have to do with patterns that connect us into larger systems. But there are leads and lags. And in the words of the great hockey player who said, why was he so great? He said, I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck will be. And so historically, and in terms of public policy, we have to learn to skate to where the puck is going to be. We can anticipate changes as leads and lags. And then there are leverage points. In thinking about public policy, there's a whole lot that bothers us in terms of public policy, but are there certain policies that if we got them right, we get lots of other things right as well? And so there are those kind of leverage points. And then there are tipping points. There are those points beyond which we have a whole different system. So when James Hansen, the great climate scientist who was on your campus not long ago, says that we're in the danger of creating a different planet. He's referring to tipping points, and they're roughly, for climate scientists, they're roughly 10 or 12 that they track. That if we go a little further on some of those, we'll create a different planet. The upshot is this. In trying to think about the world and how we respond to it, we need to think about optimizing systems, not components. And so in terms of building science, for example, if you optimize the HVAC system and not the shell, you end up with a bad building. And so it's optimizing the entire system called a building that is what's required. And optimizing the components simply, in Amory Lovin's words, pessimizes the structure. End-use efficiency tells us that whatever we want to do, efficiency at the point of end use, where energy is actually used, is a lot cheaper, better, simpler, and so forth than trying to increase supply. And that's been a hard lesson for Americans to get through our heads. We keep thinking that increasing supply of energy is what we need to do, and so during the election campaign of 2008, for example, you heard a lot about nuclear power and clean coal, and if you believe that, let's talk later. But not about efficiency improvements and trying to understand how we eliminate the need to use energy in the first place by just smarter design, better technology, and so forth. So that's just physics. And then another upshot is that the purchase price, what you pay at the checkout counter, is very seldom equal to the full cost of the thing. The price doesn't equal cost. And we know that in lots of different ways. There was a report released several weeks ago by the National Academy of Sciences, or probably National Research Council, that showed that 20,000 Americans, at a minimum, die because of inhaling small particle pollution from coal-fired power plants. I live in an area where we power the state of Ohio mostly by coal, and those deaths are nowhere recorded on my electric bill. And so there are unpriced costs out there, but the price of my electricity is 7 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour. In no way is the full cost of that electricity. And then for resilience, and this I wanted to transition into the talk. For resilience, we need to rethink a good many of the assumptions we've had about how we provision ourselves with food, energy, water, materials, healthcare, livelihood, how we make the human presence on the planet. And if we want to make this in a way that's resilient and fair and decent and hopefully lovely and sustainable, we have to rethink a lot of things by which how we provision ourselves with all of these kinds of things. And then finally, for those of us who are involved in politics in any way at all, everything I'm going to describe fits both as a liberal view of the world and as a conservative view of the world. And so one of the things politically we've got to do is to transcend this deadlock between liberal and conservative that has paralyzed our capacity to actually solve real problems that will fall very heavily on your generation long after mine is gone. This is where I live. This is Lorain County, and that's Lake Erie. We're 14 miles, the town of Oberlin is just 14 miles down here from the shore of Lake Erie. Detroit is right up here, Cleveland is right there, Toledo, Ohio is over here. And so we're right in the middle of what's typically called the Rust Belt. A lot of small towns that in the 1950s and 60s were very prosperous mill towns are boarded up. If you have not been to Detroit, Google Detroit. There are lots of websites that will show you pictures of what it looks like. It is a nightmare. If that had been done by an invading army, we would be genuinely outraged. We'd have declared war on somebody about something. But the fact is, we did to Detroit, we did that ourselves. Now, a couple of assumptions as we began to think about what we do in place. One is we're used to solving, and this goes back to the way we organize our academic life. If you look at your university catalog or look at my university catalog, you see a lot of boxes. We call them departments. There are departments of politics and physics and economics and so forth, and they don't much talk back and forth to each other. And so we put learning into a series of silos. I'm sure this is not true here at this university, but it is true in a lot of places. It certainly is true in mine. So knowledge, people in different departments and disciplines very seldom communicate back and forth. It's called interdisciplinary. But now we face a world in which we've got to solve for what Wendell Berry, the great writer, once called, we've got to solve for pattern. And that is, we've got to find ways to solve where single solutions solve a whole range of problems or avoid problems in the first place. Second assumption is that the list down here is all this stuff. We've been out, we environmental people, and people in agriculture, in forestry, in architecture, and fields like biomimicry, Janine Benyus here locally, have been doing lots of things for lots of years. I think we're ready for prime time. I think we know how to rebuild or remake the human presence on the planet in ways that are genuinely fair, decent, lovely, and sustainable. I think that's been the accumulated wisdom and knowledge and science and research and activities of literally thousands of organizations around the planet. So when Paul Hawken talks about blessed unrest, and if you've seen Paul's talk on this on the screen, literally thousands of organizations stream past like you're in a Star Trek movie. And that's this network. He thinks it's something rather like a planetary immune system. But what's happening has really been quite extraordinary. Can you make buildings powered by sunlight? Well, yeah, you can. Can we eliminate the concept of waste? Well, yes, we can. Can you run businesses on sunlight and in a way that creates no waste product? Well, Ray Anderson at Interface Carpet Corporation has shown you can do that. So we begin to look at all the accumulated skills and abilities. So my second assumption is we're ready for prime time. It's time to break down silos and get people talking back and forth about how we build decent communities and then tap into a knowledge base that is really quite extraordinary. This, at some point in the future, may look a whole lot like our view back at the European Enlightenment of the 18th century, gathering momentum and then culminating in the American Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and so forth, things that we now largely take for granted. But there's something like a knowledge basis for an enlightenment, and call it an ecological enlightenment. I'm not sure why Google colored everything here brown and then this square green, but that's a Google map of where I live. And down here, this is Oberlin, Ohio. This is a little town that was founded. This, by the way, is part of the swamp, Great Swamp, that once went from the east or the west side of Cleveland all the way to Toledo. And if you doubt that, come this spring and go down in my basement, and you'll see why it's still a swamp. We just pump water out. Anyway, this is part of the Great Swamp area. It was settled by people who were burned out of their homes in fires in Connecticut, and so this is called the Firelands Concession. And lots of people from Connecticut settled in this area. Among them were people who wanted to form a little college out here in the wilderness. The college was started in 1832. In 1833, it opened its doors for students, and among the students were the first African Americans and the first women admitted to higher education. And so the college started with that background. We were a college with a purpose. And we spoke to the big issues of the 19th century. It had to do with human slavery and opportunity and so forth. We started with this project 2 years ago. It's got some antecedents that go back farther, and I'll mention a couple of those, but it started 2 years ago. And the intention was to take this little town and create a model of the first Rust Belt version, prosperous post-fossil fuel sustainable economy. And I have a proposal in my briefcase that roughly describes, it's a 35,000-foot view of this project. And I took that to a friend of mine, Danny Goldberg, who's the rock and roll entrepreneur. And Danny is a guy who's been very prominent in rock and roll business and works with Bruce Springsteen and lots of rock and roll groups. I said, Danny, I need your help to sell this. And I put the proposal down on his desk, and he looked at it for a while, and he said, well, David, you can't call it that. You need something better than post-cheap, fossil fuel, sustainable, prosperous economy. Anyways, we're still working on what to call this. But in any event, it's an alternative to the way we now live. We have three goals. The first is to take a 13-acre block that the college owns in the downtown of Oberlin and redo the block. And I'll describe the block in a bit to you. The college owns all the land. It abuts the main downtown part of Oberlin. We're calling it the Green Arts District because it's got an art museum, performing arts center. It'll have a jazz club and a few other arts ingredients in it. Our second goal is to draw a circle around, roughly a circle of 5 to 6 mile radius, around the city and the college, and make that by a variety of ways, make that carbon neutral. And do this in a way that hopefully will get us to the point where we're actually exporting green power back onto the grid. Our third goal is to create a 20,000 acre, give or take, green belt around the city for agriculture, forestry, carbon sequestration, and biofuels. So the intention here is to make a model. Everything you've ever heard about the word sustainability is built into this project. We expect to make 4 outcomes. One is a model of an economy that works. And we are, by and large, creatures of sight. We believe what we see and what we can experience, feel, and touch. And then right now, the idea of a sustainable economy is still kind of something that floats up there. How do you do it? What's it look like? What do people do? And so the intention is to make something that in fact works as a genuine post-carbon economy. When we did the Lewis Center 15 years ago, started the Lewis Center 15 years ago, and the building opened 10 years ago, we drew a circle around that and we said, if you want to be involved in making of a building, come on. So we opened the doors and it became part of the educational experience at Oberlin. We had about 250 students that worked on the project. And they worked with a credible design team. We had Amory Lovins and John Todd and Carol Franklin and people from NASA and so forth. We had about 25 designers working with Oberlin students. We want to do the same thing on this project. So one of the difficulties, I think, for all of you young people is this. You hear people like me or Climate Science, Jim Hansen, and your own faculty telling you that this is not the best of all possible worlds. That in your lifetime, in the early part of your lifetime, we're going to make the decisions about whether and how life is lived throughout the rest of this century and beyond. And that's simply the truth. And we're obliged to tell you the truth as best we can see it. And don't blow that off as just doom and gloom. It just happens to be the scientific discourse. That's what's being said about the inertial momentum of human civilization on Earth. And so, having told you the truth about that, what I've done is to raise the anxiety level. The tendency is eat, drink, and be merry, and that's one way to deal with anxiety. The other is to begin to redirect that energy to something that is positive and engages your talents and skills, focuses your career and your ambitions and how you see yourself in the future and how you would eventually write your autobiography on the topography of this particular time. So we want to do the latter. We want to engage students in this project so that this becomes a genuine campus-wide effort. And so we pull together a consortium of public schools, two-year colleges, a vocational school, and a college, and a consortium to begin to create what's called this green curriculum. this is a third item. This sounds airy-fairy, but a good bit of the dialogue about sustainability is up here at the level of scientific discourse. It's parts per million, parts per billion, it's 10 years out, it's techie talk. And that doesn't move many of us very far for very long. Now, Oberlin College has, we've got a great conservatory of music, usually ranked with Juilliard and Eastman. The college turns out more students that go on for PhDs in sciences than any other small college or comparable liberal arts college in the country, and that's true year after year. And so we want to bring these two streams together. We want to discourse about the largest issues on the human agenda, which have to do with survival and the terms by which we will survive or not in the future. And we want that discourse to engage the best of our scientific thinking, the best of the humanities, and the best of the arts. That's a big conversation. And it's now the only serious conversation we ought to be having. It's the only, everything else is simply a footnote to that large conversation. So we want that discourse to begin here. What's that mean? Well, I don't know. It's different conversations by different people. It's different people having lunch and talking with each other. It's different kinds of arts. It's perhaps different sciences eventually. So that is the fourth outcome, or third outcome. There is a fourth outcome, which I didn't have listed on here. We want to do this in a way that makes this a big deal. Not for ego reasons, not because we want to be famous for any particular reason, but because the world now needs working models. We need places where people can go and you can see and touch and feel this experience of sustainable living. So we're going to develop a vision for the college and the town, and this is a conversation that's begun with the city manager, the city council, the utility district, the school district, and so forth. The second item here is financing all this, and this gets difficult. We've lived on an unbelievable level of credit for a long time. We drew down a stock of fossil fuels and what's being called natural capital, and we were never as rich as we thought we were. And of course, there's an irony in all this. And the irony is, let me put it this way. It may be that we're richer than we could have known when we believed ourselves to be merely wealthy. I mean richer in terms of human contacts and neighborhoods and creativity and the kinds of things that bond us together in working communities. And maybe we don't have as much financial wealth as we once thought, and I think that certainly is true. But we perhaps will find that we are wealthy in lots of other ways that we don't count. To pull this off, there's been a historic battle between environmentalists on one side and business people on the other. That's got to be ended. We need people who can actually deliver sustainability. So if you go to the phone book in my town and you look under, let's say, S for sustainable anything, or E for energy services, you'll find a void in both cases. There's simply no businesses. So we need to figure out how to begin to build the infrastructure, largely commercial and business infrastructure, to actually begin to deliver sustainability. And so this means food enterprises and farms and brokers and financiers and energy service companies and the people who actually come and help us reshape the way we live. We need public policy changes. We need to change the incentives that people have. And this is, tonight I'll talk a little bit more about how this works at the national level, but we need people to understand that when you flip on a switch, that is expensive and you're going to pay for it. And you'll pay the true cost eventually over time. So the cost of electron is not the national average of 9 cents. If you factor in the cost of, let's say, acid rain, climate change, premature deaths of 20,000 or more people, then the cost of electron goes up to, or kilowatt hour of electricity goes up to what? 20, 25 cents, 50 cents? I mean, you put a number on that, but it certainly is not 9 cents. So there's an effort here to begin to rethink the pricing for electricity in Oberlin and get the price pegged at the right level. And then the training I just mentioned with high school and community college and so forth. So this is kind of what the partnership looks like. The question is whether a college, or in your case, if this is applicable here, a university could become a driver toward a green economy. So we typically think of a university as a sort of, or college as a self-contained thing. It's important for what happens inside it. It employs people in the local community, but not much more. In this case, we're asking, can we be a driver toward a whole new economy? Can we be the force that begins to galvanize and catalyze this larger coalition of people and organizations toward a different kind of economy? This is the Lewis Center. We started work on this. The planning began in the summer of 1995. We actually opened the building in January of 2000. This is south, north, east, and west. This is a plaza named for John Lyell that bounces light into the building. Gnomon here. The shadow of this gnomon marks the seasons across here, the solstices and equinoxes. This is a wetland. We're getting ready to expand this next summer. 2 photovoltaic arrays on the building. This is a living machine. By the way, to get pictures like this, we strapped a first-year student to a helium-filled balloon. Don't know where she's gone now, but anyway, this is the Lewis Center. What we did in this, when Thoreau says, I went to Walden to drive some of the problems of living in a corner where I could study them. What we did in this building, it's roughly an acre and a quarter site. We drove some of the problems of sustainability into that acre and a quarter site, so we created effectively a laboratory where these issues can be studied. So in the back of the building, there are gardens. You can't see them very well here, and there's an orchard right behind the building. This is ecological restoration. This is ecological engineering. This is solar power. The building has 160 data sensors, so when you go to the website, what you see is real-time data on how the building actually works. So we basically created a laboratory that dealt with energy, design, agriculture, water, materials, and so forth. And so the building, every year we've got classes in this. It became a way to change the curriculum by trying to calibrate the curriculum to the setting of the curriculum. So this is the model for what we want to do downtown, but we want to raise the scale by 20 or 30 times, increase the cost, take advantage of better technology and better design integration. This is the back of the building. You can see the orchards here, and off to the right outside the screen here are gardens and so forth. This, I think, is still the only entirely solar-powered building on U.S. College campus, and the only zero-discharge building, as far as I know, on a college campus. This is one of our 2 senators, Sherrod Brown, and Ohio has, and I'll show you some slides on investment in just a minute, but Ohio has fallen behind the country in lots of ways for lots of reasons, mostly having to do with lack of leadership. And Sherrod, right after I took this picture, Sherrod turned to me and said, where did you get that particular array? I said, our choices were we could buy it from Germany, or you could buy it from Japan, but you could not buy that equipment in the state of Ohio when we needed to buy it. And of course, the irony was not lost on him, because 24 miles away is the NASA Glenn Space Center, where a good bit of the technology for photovoltaics was first developed. 50 miles to the west is First Solar, one of the large solar manufacturing companies in the country, but they had just committed their entire production for 5 years to Germany, where there's a feed-in tariff and public policy was receptive to it. So we buy our high-tech equipment in the state of Ohio from overseas, and we pay unemployment checks in Ohio. That's no way to run an economy, and it's part and parcel of the whole U.S. Scene right now. This is the downtown corridor. And again, this is north, south, east, and west. So you can see the town of Oberlin. It's a town of about 10 or 12,000 people. This is the development corridor that we're using to drive this project. At the north end of this is a public school that is in the early planning stages that's intended to be a carbon neutral school. And doing what we did on the Lewis Center, and that is to make a school building a part of its own pedagogy. So a school building that generates its own power, where students grow some of their own food, process their own wastewater, and so the way the school is actually built, designed, and maintained becomes part of the curriculum. This is the Green Arts Block right here. This is Tappan Square, named for the Tappan brothers, abolitionists of the 19th century. This is 13 acres. This block is also 13 acres, so they're same size. Right south of the Green Arts Block is a theater, a historic theater that the college just bought, a charming old place. It's like walking back into the 1920s. And that's the last time it had been maintained also. So the college bought it, has refurbished the theater. The East College Street project right here is a project begun by 3 of my former students that stayed in town. They're part of the generation that the phrase is they failed to launch. They stayed in town. So they formed a development company, incredible story, raised $15 million and started a project you'll see in just a second. Another one of my students stayed in town and created a biodiesel operation, biofuels operation. He's doing well financially. They're doing well financially. And a third student of mine started 2 restaurants up here one here and one here, the best restaurants in town. And he flunked the last course he took from me. He came to my office in the summer and he said, after flunking a class of mine on sustainable agriculture, he was one of my advisees, and I got along with him very well, and he said, I'm going to start this restaurant. And what do you think about that? And my head was going up and down like this. My brain was going, no way, no how. You flunked a class of mine. You are dead meat on the highway of ambition. You're destined for failure. And then when he turned these into a couple of really great restaurants, I learned that success in my courses was not necessarily positively correlated with success in life. And that's a rude, you'll all keep that secret, please. Don't let that, turn the camera on. Anyway, Joe Walzer has bought an old grocery store here, and in addition to his restaurants, is turning that into kind of an environmental Costco. It's part of the business fabric of sustainability. I mean, where do you buy green products? I mean, you've got some of that here in Missoula, and some great things happening here, but in Oberlin, we don't have that. So we're trying to develop the commercial underpinnings of a sustainable economy. So that's the town. This is kind of focusing in on the Green Arts Block and the school. These are the components we want. We have a hotel. I'll show you pictures of it in just a minute. We need a better hotel. We want a 4-star restaurant, and we want to do this in a way that's platinum rated by the USGBC system and entirely powered by sunlight and zero discharge. There is a performing arts center. Music is a very important part of the block and part of the college life, and so that's going to be part of it. There'll be student housing. We want to do this with students working with the design team and taking a standard like the One World standard and figuring out what that means for the next dorm that we'll build on campus. But I want a group of students working with the design team on this project and being part of the creation of this space, and do it in a way that is ultimately educational. And then there are businesses. We've got a little business incubator that'll be in the block. We want all the kind of advanced technology, but also all the simple non-technological solutions we can weave together. So this isn't just a high-techy block. There'll be some of that, but a lot of other things as well. This takes a bit of explaining. I won't take time now to do this, but we want to do an ecological design center. So as we do this, I want to think about how we build a bridge from this little circle of a maybe 6-mile radius back out to Cleveland on one side and Detroit and Toledo on the other side. What is it that we will learn about human settlement and design and community making that might be useful to Rust Belt cities and the rebuilding of that part of the world? So that's the story about that. This is the Allen Arts Museum. This anchors the northwest corner of that 13-acre block. This is a Cass Gilbert building. And Cass Gilbert was the architect, famous architect in the early part of the 20th century. He designed the U.S. Supreme Court building, among other buildings. Incredible structure. He did 4 buildings on the Oberlin College campus. This is undergoing renovation right now as the first step toward rebuilding this block. This will come in at the U.S. Green Building Council either silver or gold level. This is the Performing Arts Center that is in the middle, again, on the west face of the block. This needs to be rebuilt, and the plans for that haven't really begun. This is the Oberlin Inn, and this building was built to the very exacting design standards of interstate motels built about 1955. And you may have seen the report in the New York Times and some of the other papers or NPR that Ohio had an infestation of bed bugs. And at the last trustee meeting, 3 trustees were bitten, one rather severely, by bed bugs. And so the next morning, they came in and they had a proposal for the Oberlin Inn. And it was in the megaton range. Now, our president is an attorney, and for him, it's very important to measure the response to the particular provocation. So he recommended only a kiloton range explosion. But we are now looking at the possibilities of rebuilding the hotel, the existing hotel, or building entirely new. There's been no decision made on that. But the hotel and the Allen Art Museum anchor the west face of this block. We're starting in programming for the rest of the block by December of this year. We'll have the first cut at the programming. By the end of, or say by the middle of 2010, we'll have a more detailed program statement. And from that point on, we're ready to move into construction on various other components. This is the south side of the block. This is the project begun by Josh, Naomi, and Ben. And Josh, Naomi, and Ben are right there. This is an early artist rendition of what they intended. They made the New York Times real estate section a year or two back. An incredible story. They've gone out and they've raised $15 million or a bit more to design a building that's mixed housing and Florida or street level commercial space, office space, as well as housing for a variety of income groups. We want to do this block. The U.S. Green Building Council is starting a standard for neighborhood development. So they've gone from can you do single buildings rated at the LEED rating or LEED Silver or LEED Gold or LEED Platinum. Now why they rate buildings environmentally using heavy metals as the descriptor, I don't know, but they do. So now they're raising the ante. Can you do this in a way, can you take those same standards now and apply it to an entire block? So that's the standard we're now using. And there are two competing standards that will probably somehow merge together. One is called the Living Building Challenge, where you simply look at performance data after the fact instead of long checklists. That's a long story here, but we're going to marry those two. This is a student house on campus. This is called the Seed House. It's gotten to be fairly well known because it's got a lot of national attention. But this is a student house. It came out of a design class that I teach. Students want to take a house that the college owned and begin to improve it using very little money and just making basically design changes that could be made with about $40,000 budget, which is well within the means of most Oberlin citizens. So this is what's going to happen in terms of the downtown. First of all, property values in the downtown are going to go up. That's going to help drive development. There'll be a green belt around the city. Have that underway also. There'll be new businesses. I don't know how many, I don't know how many jobs, but I can easily imagine 10 or 12 or 15 new enterprises over the next decade or so. New jobs, new careers. We want to draw a circle around this and make the entire project, as we did with the Lewis Center, we want to make it educational. And so this is one of these prime opportunities to take students like all of you in this room, connect you with incredible designers. And so you understand that this is an unusual time. The years and the minutes are ticking by, and we don't have a lot of time to turn civilization in a radically different direction. But you now know you've acquired some of the skills and abilities and analytic wherewithal to begin to shift in a radically different direction. We think a lot of people will come to see this, so kind of build it and they will come mentality, but we believe that people will want to come see what's underway. And then it's a model of a prosperous economy. We've been working a lot on energy issues, and there are a lot of moving parts to this, but how do you get to carbon neutrality? Our main fuel source has been coal. We've got to shift off coal, so we're looking at biomass, we're looking at landfill gas. We have a landfill that is located 2 miles from the city with a gas reservoir estimated to be 40 or 50 years, roughly at about 30 megawatts per year. So that would supply the city energy if we were able to tap it. I'm learning a whole lot on this project because this is the rights to the gas are owned by an Australian company. And so we're involved in a lot of legalities over that issue. This is the organization chart, more or less. And we have a variety of people in each of these areas now as part of a leadership team. And after working on this intensely for the past year, I'll tell you, I don't think that we'll fail because money will be short, even in a bad economy. I don't think we'll fail because the technology isn't up to it. I think the technology is more than available. If we fail, and let me turn that in a different direction, if the biggest hurdle we have to overcome is going to be our capacity to organize, to bring people together around a commonly derived vision. This can't be David Orr's vision. It certainly will not be David Orr's vision. It's got to be something that when you run the credits for this, when it's more or less finished, the credits include hundreds and hundreds of people who put their energies and creativity and money and effort into this. This is the Greenbelt, and what we intend the Greenbelt to be is essentially a source of food, the market for which is inside the Greenbelt in the city. A source of wood products, so where we make tables and chairs and so forth, begin to make those locally and to create businesses around wood products and crafts and so forth. You can imagine is not hard to imagine, beginning to put together an educational program around reforestation. So the cutting, milling, drying of lumber becomes something that's taught at the local Votech school. Forest ecology is taught at the college, and a good bit of the skills necessary for a wood and agrarian economy are provisioned locally. This is Bob Berkebile, the architect. Bob is one of the great architects in the country. Bob is heading up the effort right now to get us into programming. And a couple of closing thoughts. Oberlin is a very distinctive little town. It is said that we're the town that started the Civil War. We were an underground railroad site. And so slaves coming out of north out of Kentucky, came through Cincinnati and came to Oberlin. And we were the last stop before they went across Lake Erie into Canada. These are some, without lingering on any one of these things, which you probably can't see because the print's too small, but we've got a track record of doing lots of things around environment. Most of them are fairly scattered. And the goal now is to bring these together into a comprehensive plan that the college is the catalytic agent and begins to pull the town and other agents and non-governmental organizations in the city and the school district together around a transformation of the area. And then I don't want to stop there. I said that the Ecological Design Center, the very last thing we'll do in the block, will be if we can conceive this and pull this off. This is the kind of thing that would be then a bridge out to other places that really do need environmental help and better planning assistance and ecological design. And so the Ecological Design Center is a bridge back over to Cleveland, to Detroit, Toledo, and Youngstown, Ohio. Energy development, I'm going to skip over a couple of these things, but in trying to think about how we develop a Rust Belt state, this is a huge issue of public policy. And this is one of the reasons why the votes in the Senate bill, Sherrod Brown's vote in particular, is sort of up for grabs. The climate legislation has got to be good for people in Ohio. I mean, as much as I hesitate to say that, I think that's simply true. We have an industrial state, largely industry and agriculture both, but the way we solve the climate problem has got to be fair across the board to everybody. That's a complicated political calculation. Windmills have roughly 8,000 parts in them. Most of those are made in places like Ohio. So this is a Environmental Defense Fund map of a couple of different states, and these are green and blue balloons that indicate specific firms that make things that are critical either to renewable energy or to energy efficiency. And they're things we make already. The trick of the green economy is to begin to redirect these in a different way to take advantage of what we already know how to do what we simply have to do. This is California. This is passage of AB 32, the climate bill that passed several years ago. And look what happened to the number of firms and to investment. And it's continued all the way through into the recession. It's slowed down a bit in the last year. But by comparison, this is Ohio. California passed state legislation and said we're going to move energy prices up. We're going to separate sales from profitability, and we're going to establish a climate cap. And so the result for business was that those then were clear objectives. You could then plan business around those particular objectives. The result was an economic bonanza of sorts, even in a bad economy. But in the state of Ohio, that has been, until very recently, entirely flat. So whether it's Montana or California or Ohio, we've got to begin to put money into this green economy in ways that reduce carbon, create jobs, and set America on a very different path. This is what it looks like. There's no mystery here. We've known how to do this. The question is now, will we do it? And of course, will we do it in time to avert the worst? Now, I think that's all I want to say. So let me stop here with one final note. What I've said and what I'll say tonight is we're at a hinge point. The title of the book I'll talk about tonight is Down to the Wire, and I think that's exactly where we are. There isn't a lot of time left. And that's not doom and gloom, that simply is a scientific discourse. And right now, if I look at the public discourse, whether it's Glenn Beck or Rush Limbaugh or CNN or whatever, there is a huge gap between the scientific discourse on one side and the public discourse on the other. I don't know how to bridge that gap. But I know in each of our communities to begin to transcend that and build bridges across it, maybe it isn't one bridge, maybe it's multiple bridges. The kind of things you're doing here in Missoula that I've seen a bit of today and have seen on previous visits, but the kind of things we're trying to start in Oberlin. Maybe we don't bridge it nationally first, but we begin to bridge this in specific kinds of places where sustainability, whatever that may mean in the end, becomes the default setting. It's harder to do things that are unsustainable than things that are easily sustainable. And then the last thing, I work as an educator. And so my sense of your generation, those of you who are students in the room, is that you can look at all these big numbers, things going up like this and down like this, and you throw up your hands and be totally despairing of it. And it requires some stamina and some courage to look at those numbers and then come over, walk across that bridge, roll up your sleeves, and begin to act to create the basis for a very different culture and civilization. And if you don't do that, what else do you do with your life? This is the big issue. It's whether and how and the terms of which we will survive in the future or we simply will perish. And there's nobody who knows the science that can run the film fast forward far enough. We can quibble about whether it's 2020 or 2050 or 2100 or 2200 by some dint of luck we can't understand now. But the human experiment comes undone at some point given our current directions. That's simply the science. And so there is another path here, and that the important part for me right now is to begin to create pathways to a very different kind of future. Tonight I'll describe some other things that we do at the national level and so forth. But let me stop here and let's talk. Questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah.
So I have a couple questions relating to policy, because a lot of this is set at the policy level. In the community of Oberlin, what are your local planning laws like that will either enable you or restrict you in doing this? Because it seems that a lot of times, even take here, for instance, in Missoula, if you try to do an innovative building, home or something, you want to put LEED certified, you want to do solar, you want to do wind, you can't, because there's no rules or provisions for it, or there's restrictions. So how is that playing into this whole experiment in Oberlin, and have you had to change those policies?
You know, great question. Thanks for asking that. We are, Oberlin has an image in the public mind, I think, of being this avant-garde, wild and crazy place and so forth, and we're not. We're very typical Ohio. And there's a college, there's a city, and the city has been pretty average in terms of city. So all the building codes and all the permitting process is pretty typically Ohio, which is to say it's not we're not California. And so one of the things you're asking is where are the policy barriers, where are the hurdles we have to get over? So in the work behind this, and I didn't put the organization chart fully on the screen, but we've got the city manager, people in the city council, the school district, some people on city council working with us on this. And I think this is a case that's going to test our political capacities in a small city to begin to connect to people, to anticipate where there are going to be hurdles and things to overcome, and do that in advance. So building codes, absolutely, we need to change building codes. When we did the Lewis Center, we had a living machine, which wastewater comes in one end, relatively clean water goes out the other end. And it appeared in the campus or the town paper. Somebody referred to this as our sludge pond. And you can imagine the outcry. I mean, people live up and down that street, and they're going to have a sludge pond there. And so we had to bring John Todd down and explain, no, a living machine is not a sludge pond. And here's how it works. But we had to do that in anticipation of the actual construction. So keeping people informed and building a larger constituency is going to be essential to the success of this. And looking at all those institutional barriers, all the financial barriers, and trying to anticipate that in advance. So it's a really good question. Let's talk in about 2 years. But this is just called local politics. There's going to be some opposition. It hasn't surfaced yet in our case, but there will be some opposition we can count on. So.
You said in response to that lady's question something about the reputation of Oberlin in relation to the rest of Ohio. You might say the same thing about Missoula in relation to the rest of Montana. Do you have a way of sort of pushing out from the college town reputation and bridging towards other counties in Ohio?
Thanks for asking that. If sustainability is only what happens inside Missoula, or inside Oberlin, we will have failed. We've got to get out to the, pardon the expression, the guys at the truck stop. And it's got to become the default setting. And I don't have any magic answer for that, except that I think we have to talk to people, more people. We have to be out there and meet them on their terms. People have to see this as an advantage. And no one has to drink the Kool-Aid about climate change or environment or anything else. It's got to intersect with where people are. So for example, the way we solve our energy issues, I'd love to see us create 4, 5, 6, 10 different businesses and begin to help people finance those businesses. For example, if we shift to biomass, we've got a lot of wood chips to make and so forth, or switchgrass to grow or whatever it might be. But that's somebody, that's some landowner, that's some farmer out there, and then developing a business tie so we're buying what they sell in long-term contracts. So this thing is something that creates jobs in the economy. It becomes an economic driver within the region. And you know, south of us, there are cities that are very conservative. And there are people that voted for George Bush. So we're kind of in the same boat. College towns tend to be this way. They tend to be isolated, and it's kind of like you know, the Socialist Republic of, and then fill in the blank with the name of the college, and then surrounded by this sea of relative hostility or indifference. We've got to overcome that. And I can see in this case that you know, if you begin to put, there are about 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, and if we become drivers for economic renewal, that's an incredibly powerful force. And so that's the intention here. But you know, to both your questions, part of this is just a matter of openness and dialogue and building coalitions and meeting people, and also at the end of the day, creating situations where people, you've got jobs and you've changed the economy. And sustainability isn't some abstract theory that we talk about in a university setting. It's the actual way the local economy works. And I think that's, you know, again, give us 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and we'll see that. But it's not ever going to be a kind of once and for all thing. It's going to be something you have to work at continually.
Something that keeps coming up in my world, in my life, I was at a healthcare meeting earlier in the week, and just here listening. I feel like a lot of this comes down to ethics and morality. You know, and this constant consumeristic aspect of Americans. And I'm like sitting here thinking we need to shift in the American ethics or the American culture about who we are on this earth and what we think we're entitled to, and you know, where we think our food comes from, and our energy and all those sorts of things. I mean, talk about a big, you know, movement to try to market our culture differently, essentially.
I agree.
Question in there.
I agree. Well, it's well, I mean, you said that well. And I think that, I don't know how you make, this has come a couple times during the conversations today, I don't know how you change culture. You know, and we've got a lot of unlearning to do. And one of the conversations I've had repeatedly in the last several months, when you look back and you say, well, you know, Americans once sacrificed. This came up last night at kind of dinner in a way. Americans once sacrificed. We were the kind of people who saved string and saved metals, and we grew our, you know, 40% of our vegetables in 1944 were grown in victory gardens. You know, we did those kind of things. And we were the people who took on, you know, communism and fascism and depression, and we fought it. But that required something more than market solutions. That required community, where people came together. Not always, not everywhere, not any one place at all the time. But one of the recurring themes that comes back now is it's a question of whether we are still that kind of people. And I don't know. We'll find out. But we're not going to, you know, we're not going to get through what E.O. Wilson, the great Harvard biologist, calls the bottleneck. You know, 7 billion of us coming in this end, and what comes out the other end when this planet, this climate storm is over, the biodiversity crisis has leveled out. How many of us will still be on the planet? This what James Howard Kunstler calls, and I cite this in the book, the long emergency. What kind of people are we? And I don't know. You know, we've marinated for 30 or 40 years, as all of you know, in this free market stuff that came out of the University of Chicago and some other places, but it was market mania. And markets were the answer. Whatever the question was, markets were the answer. And so we've marinated in that, and I don't know, I think that we're the worse for it, Markets are where you and I come in and we say I. But politics and governance is where you and I come in and we say we. And now we have to say the we in terms large enough to include other species and future generations. And that is really tough. It's Kenneth Boulding's old quip about what have future generations done for me lately? Well, not one damn thing. And by definition, they can't. The question is whether we have the foresight, the compassion, the good judgment to act on their behalf, even if it hurts. And sometimes it won't hurt so much as it, we'll find out later that in fact it's a pretty good deal. It was in our self-interest to have been sacrificial and farsighted in the first place. And there's obviously a paradox in that. But I think you're exactly right. I think it's a cultural issue. I think our culture in lots of ways got off track, but not entirely. You know, we've got the elements to build with. And all of you have skills and abilities and things that you can do and contribute. But can we pull together? And I think that's kind of the ultimate question. You said that really well. It's kind of the ultimate question. Can we pull together to create something a lot better than what's in prospect? Yeah.
Is there a sustainable transportation element to your plan?
You know, let me give two answers to that. Let me go way back. I grew up in a little town in western Pennsylvania, town of 2,200 people. And if you walk down the main street in that town when I was 5 years old, there were 2 jewelry shops, 2 hardware stores. There was still a railroad connection once a week to that little town. There was a lumber yard, a locker plant for beef, 2 grocery stores, drugstore, coffee shop. You know, it was all there. And a little movie theater, 2,200 people. Now that town has virtually no downtown. There's a pizza shop, there's still a drugstore, and that's about it. Everything else is gone. So what was once a resilient system, a whole lot could happen out yonder in the world, and it didn't bother us. Yeah, we were independent enough. There was a local dairy, there were farms around the city or the little town, and so we weren't, it wasn't autarky, but we were pretty self-reliant, and it was resilient. And so a lot of things could happen in the world in the same way the Amish, south of us in Oberlin, Ohio, you know, they're pretty resilient. You can have a banking collapse and they don't much notice that. Now in transportation, that's going to be a tough nut. And the reason is that the railroad connection to Oberlin was shut down in 1965. You used to be able to get to Oberlin by train, you could leave and you can get to Chicago or New York. Now that rail, the rail rights-of-way still exists, but the train is shut down and the train station is now a daycare center. So we've become the great American motion sickness. We've got to figure out what to do with this. And the first step is fuel efficiency, driving stuff that gets a lot of miles per gallon. Second step is figure out how we get out of our cars. And this means bike trails, public transit, light rail, heavy rail. And then there's a longer term step, and that means redesigning communities so you have access. You've got schools, jobs, hospitals, shopping, and so forth within easy walking or biking distance. And that's the way it used to be. And there is an effort in the design world called the New Urbanist Movement to try to recreate those sort of communities, because it turns out they tend to be the places people want to live. Every now and then I live in London, and in London not only do I not need a car, I don't want a car. I can get on the tube and I can get on trains, I can get to about anywhere I need to go without a car, and I don't want the hassle of having to park the thing or pay for the thing. But there's a transportation revolution that's got to be built into this. Now we haven't addressed it here in this particular case, although it's kind of on the docket. We're a great little town to bike in. But I still have students that will drive 3 blocks to go to class. And they think it's their constitutional right. So we've got to work on that one. But that's a tough nut to crack.
I'm just curious, because a lot of this ties in with basically, I term it sense of entitlement, in which a lot of people have with the policies in which we've created. But I'm curious, what have been the population flux and projections that Oberlin's expecting? Because I mean, in 2 years, you're probably not going to see a significant increase or decline, and it's pretty stable because you have a university there. But what are you looking at as kind of a threshold for success with this? Because it's 10 to 20,000 people. Missoula's closer to 60, kind of countywide. Looking at that, so I'm kind of curious what you're looking at as population thresholds for success in the sustainability movement.
You know, I haven't thought about it is in terms of population number. I think because of this, we're going to grow some. And I think that we're now 10 or 12,000, I think that we could grow to 15 or 20 and be a better city. But right now, the pattern in our part of the world, Cleveland is about the same, the Cleveland region is about the same number of people that it was in 1950. But the center is hollowed out. And the same is true in Detroit. And so people have moved out to Medina County and Lorain County, and so there's this sprawl. And we've known for a long time sprawl costs you money. Sprawl doesn't pay for itself. It's more roads, more infrastructure, more wires, more pipes, more policing, more driving once you're located in a suburban sprawling subdivision someplace. So sprawl never pays for itself. So I'm going to count this a success. If you can come into the downtown of Oberlin on, let's say, a Wednesday night, 12 o'clock at night, and there's still restaurants, bars open, there's nightlife, there are people on the streets, there are lights up in the second, third floor, buildings around there are people living there, and you've got a downtown presence. It's 24/7. And you've got a vibrant, prosperous downtown. And the furniture is made out of local woods, the food is served in local restaurants is made grown locally. There are some businesses there that don't now exist that are prosperous and thriving. And so the benchmarks, I mean, you're asking a really good question. It's kind of the benchmarks for this. And I haven't thought about population specifically as one, but I think we ought to put a target number that we ought to grow, by maybe a third, maybe a half, a bit. But that's also an issue that would have to go to the public at large. How large do you want this place to be? But if you make it desirable, really cool little downtown. Sherrod Brown, our senator, said, David, I want to help you on this, but only if you agree to make this the greatest little town in America. And so we wouldn't try to do anything else. But once you do that, people come, and then you have this paradox: if more people come in than you can handle, and more people than you may want eventually. But right now, we could take that kind of success. Our population growth rate's flat. It's not going to go down because we have a college there, and the largest air traffic control center in the United States is located in Oberlin. So there's some things there to keep the population pretty level.
In your earlier comments about economics and ethics, you seem to despair that this sort of sustainable system could be more widespread, that be driven by economics. It had to be driven by ethics. But you also pointed out earlier that the costs of the 9 cents a kilowatt hour versus a quarter kilowatt hour true costs are considered. You have a better sense now of the extra costs of this sustainable system versus normal construction. Can you make a comment on what sort of energy cost, whether the energy cost increases associated with taking all the true costs into account are sufficient to drive the extra costs, in which case you don't have to throw out markets as a mechanism for the spread of this sort of thing?
I wouldn't throw out markets at all. But the two answers to the question. One is, when we got in, we did the Lewis Center. I showed you 2 pictures of the Lewis Center. Our cost on the building, to do the raw building, about $7.2 million. We've subsequently gone back in and done some other things to raise the total investment in that site. But $7.2 million, if you took out all the anomalous costs that we had, things that were just abnormal costs to that particular site in that particular project, and you divided that by square footage, you came out with a number that was at the high end of average for the construction environment at that time, the late 1990s. But we weren't very good at understanding the full cost and the full benefits. We were pretty good at understanding the price we paid at the checkout counter, $7.2 million. But on the other side of that, we attracted about $15 million of investment in the college. We attracted a whole lot of students who wanted to be part of a design effort. So the yield, what the admissions officers called the student yield, went way up. We got, 600 or 700 pieces of national publicity. We were still in Time magazine 3 years ago with a 2-page spread. And for me as a teacher, it gave me a laboratory in sustainability. So what you'd have to do is take the cost of the building, high end of average, and then start subtracting out the collateral benefits of doing something right in the first place. So that's one answer. And we weren't very good at doing that. The second answer is this. We funded, a foundation I work for, funded a study of the cost of green buildings. And long story short, looking at about 160 cases well documented with USGBC, the greener the building, the better the economics. And that comes about for several reasons, and let me give you a couple of those. If you go to low to no VOC, carpets, paints, varnishes, and so forth, you can then meet ASHRAE indoor air quality standards with fewer air changes per hour, okay? So if you clean up the things that off gas in environments like this, take out everything that off gases, those nasty chemicals that give us cancer or, they're mutagenic or whatever. Then if you eliminate HVAC equipment, you save when you don't have to buy that equipment in the first place. You save when you don't have to operate it secondly. And you save eventually when you don't have to replace it. So it's again part of this idea of designing buildings as systems and optimizing the system, not the components. Do you follow the logic of that? You can go through design like that and you begin to find out for everything you add here, you're taking something away here. So the trick of good design done in a way that's economically smart is simply the integration of the design process. And this is on the best building projects, this is certainly happening.
I'm glad you reached that conclusion because it would be, I think, a tactical error to say that the system has to be justified ethically, but not economically.
Well, the other thing is to go back, ethics and economics are not separable either. And if we had, think about this. So right now we're facing the decision to phase out a coal-fired power plant. And we'll do it. But in that decision, coal is cheap. But coal is cheap because we don't count the full cost.
That's my point, yes.
And so those 20,000 people, the National Research Council said die every year prematurely. Now, now notice how the system works by our being ignorant of the victims. But if you had a victim's name, if you knew that Bob Smith was going to die 10 years early because he lived downwind from a coal-fired power plant, and you knew that Bob, in fact, would die 10 years early, so Bob comes in and he then sues. And so you say, okay, Bob, what are 10 years of your life worth? And Bob says, well, 10 years of my life, if I want to go out with a big bang, I'm going to die, you're going to have to pay me $50 million. And you can imagine a conversation like that. And so the utility then has to ante up $50 million because they're going to take Bob's life 10 years early. So what happens to the electric rates? Well, it goes way up. Do you follow the logic of this? The economics of that system work by our being ignorant of the victims of the system. And so if you start internalizing those kind of costs, all of a sudden, for ethical reasons, all of a sudden, hey, what we take to be cheap energy is just not cheap. It is not cheap anywhere, anyhow. And I spent a fair amount of time down in West Virginia working on coal mountaintop removal issues. And I'll tell you the devastation in West Virginia. I'll show you one slide tonight from airplane flyovers down there. Mountaintop removal has now decimated 1.5 million acres of West Virginia in the Appalachian Plateau. One of the most fecund, beautiful places on the face of the earth. We have turned it into moonscape. And the people that still live there live lives that are unbelievably bleak because of that, and that's what we call cheap energy. And that's why I find this whole clean coal campaign so outrageous. It is an outrage. There's nothing clean about coal from start to finish. And so this idea somehow there's cheap energy and so forth. But on buildings, I think if you begin to internalize those costs, there is an ethical case for this that actually begins to look pretty good. And then there's an issue too. This is getting a little bit off subject, but we take a young person into college or university, and we educate them for 4 years, but we've educated them in an institution that operates cheaply by undermining the world in which they're going to live. Then we hand them a diploma after 4 years or some such, and say, hey, it's been great having you here. By the way, we've ruined the world you're going to live in or done our part to wreck the world, and you have a nice day, and send us back a check when you get wealthy. We owe our students, as trustees for the world they inherit, we owe them better than that. And so that's part of this calculation as well. If it does cost us more, but it's the right thing to do, we've got to do it. And so I don't buy the idea that economics will rule this, because economics is such a variable science. If we include all the costs, all of a sudden it comes out doing sustainable development comes out pretty good. But your point is exactly right. We've got to make an economic argument for this, or we're just not going to get anywhere. But I'd make both of them.
I'm pretty inspired by your thoughts about breaking down the barriers between academia and society, culture, energy systems, all that. I think that's clearly a necessary movement within education and society. And I'm just wondering if there's any way that engaging students beyond their compartmentalized academic education and sort of give them a more common practice that students are staying involved with the things that they learned about, these great courses, and thus also draw the university more into the practical world away from sort of airy academic debates.
So the question is how you keep them engaged?
Yeah. I'm just worried about that process and sort of your experience with,
we never
beyond.
Yeah, we never set out. We don't have a business school. We have an econ department, obviously, but we don't have a business school. But we didn't set out to create business. It just sort of happened. So the health food store in town, 2 restaurants, biofuels, a local farm, the Cleveland Green Building Coalition, a high performance building monitoring company, all grew up kind of serendipitously, and they were all environmental studies students. I think it would be a great thing to have an incubator at a university where you're helping young people. And let me give, for instance, I've thought about this in our case. Young people who want to stay and go into farming. If you want to stay and go into farming in Ohio, you better have a lot of money. You better have $250,000 to buy land or more. Probably another $250,000 to buy equipment. And so you can't do that. But imagine a university or college that says, okay, we want to help you with low interest loans to get you property, situate you in terms of equipment and so forth, and we'll buy the following products from you at the following price range. And so you've guaranteed them a market, you've helped them get started with low interest loans or whatever. I think that would be an ideal sort of thing. And you can imagine the same thing with fuels and other things as well. So I think it'd be a great idea. I think universities right now are pretty strapped for money, and so it's not likely if it costs them anything to do it. But I think it's also one of these cases again where if you look at the system, the larger economic rationale for it, I think you could make a case for investing in things like this, or working with local banks to encourage that. So I think it's a great idea, and I'd love to see it happen. You probably all have to go do something else. Is there one last burning question, especially something that's really easy, like a yes or no?
Sorry to keep asking so many, but do you guys have anything up on the Overland website or in the community that people can track and follow this and see how you guys are doing?
Not yet. We're trying to keep this relatively low profile. And hopefully sometime next year we'll have enough staff to put that together, a website, and begin to get the publicity and so forth out. But right now it's kind of a one-person operation, and I haven't done that yet, but it's on my to-do list. Thanks for asking. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.